Wyoming Territory, 1872. The dust of the stagecoach settled in the late afternoon sunlight as the small town of Pine Ridge fell silent. The ramshackle collection of weathered buildings seemed to hold its breath as a lone figure stepped down from the coach, her emerald green traveling dress standing out against the monotone landscape like a rare flower in the desert. She was young, barely 20 years old, with honey blonde hair pulled back beneath a modest hat and eyes that darted cautiously at her surroundings. She carried nothing but a worn leather satchel and the weight of secrets etched across her beautiful face. Samuel Garrison stood at the hitching post outside the general store, one boot propped against the rail. At 25, his lean frame and easy posture belied the strength in his shoulders, a testament to years working his small cattle spread outside town. His sandy brown hair curled slightly at the edges of his hat, and a day's worth of light stubble shadowed his otherwise youthful face. He watched the woman with curiosity, noting how she stood taller than her slight frame suggested, scanning the street with a wariness that felt out of place. Samuel believed the frontier was no place for softness. He'd built his life around the hard truth that the Wyoming Territory demanded constant vigilance and independence. The graves of those who'd trusted too easily dotted the trail west. His father's final words still echoed in his mind. "Keep your own counsel, son. The only hand that won't let you down is the one at the end of your arm." 7 years running his father's ranch alone had only hardened this conviction. The station master approached the young woman, name for the register, miss. She hesitated, her knuckles whitening around the handle of her satchel. "Smith," she finally said, the name falling flat in the dusty air. Samuel couldn't say why he kept watching. Perhaps it was the way her shoulders squared despite her evident exhaustion, or how her eyes never lingered too long on any face. Whatever her story, she carried it like the heavy satchel in her hand, something precious and burdensome all at once. The woman who called herself Smith disappeared into the boarding house, and Samuel returned to his business, purchasing supplies and preparing for the ride back to his ranch. The frontier had taught him that curiosity about strangers rarely led anywhere good. Yet as he loaded his packhorse, he found his gaze drifting back to the boarding house window where a shadow moved behind thin curtains. 3 days later, Samuel was breaking a spirited Mustang in the corral behind the livery when a commotion erupted from the saloon. 2 rough-looking men burst through the batwing doors, followed by the boarding house proprietor's wife shouting about theft and deception. Samuel wouldn't have paid it much mind. The town saw its share of swindlers and card cheats, until he spotted a flash of emerald green darting down the alley beside the mercantile. Acting on instinct rather than reason, Samuel vaulted the corral fence and cut across the street, intercepting the fleeing woman at the back of the general store. She collided with his chest, nearly falling backward before his hands steadied her shoulders. "Miss Smith, I presume," he said, taking in her wide, frightened eyes. "Let me go," she hissed, trying to wrench free. "They will kill me." "Who?" Her answer was cut short by shouting from the street. Without thinking further, Samuel pulled her into the shadow of the loading dock. "The stable," he whispered. "My horse is saddled. If you're in genuine trouble, I can get you to my ranch." Desperation wrestled with distrust in her expression. "Why would you help me?" It was a fair question, one he couldn't properly answer even to himself. "Maybe I'm tired of minding my own business," he said finally. "Decision's yours, but make it quick." The sound of boots on the boardwalk decided for her. With a quick nod, she followed him through the back lots toward the livery, keeping to the shadows. Minutes later, they thundered out of town, the woman seated behind him, her arms wrapped tightly around his waist. Samuel felt the trembling in her hands and wondered what madness had possessed him to involve himself in a stranger's troubles. The ranch was 15 miles out, plenty of time to regret this impulsive decision. They rode in tense silence until the town disappeared behind them and the vast Wyoming landscape opened up around them. Only then did Samuel slow his horse to a more sustainable pace. "Whoever Smith is," he said over his shoulder, "I reckon that's not your name." Her grip loosened slightly. "No. Those men back there, they looking for someone named Smith. They're looking for someone who doesn't exist anymore." Her voice was barely audible over the horse's hoofbeats. Samuel nodded, recognizing the need for reinvention that drove many westward. "My ranch is isolated. You'll be safe there while you figure out your next move." "I cannot pay you," she said, the pride in her voice unmistakable despite her circumstances. Wasn't asking for payment. Samuel guided his horse across a shallow creek. But I do want to know who I'm harboring from whatever trouble's following you. A real name would be a start. The silence stretched so long he thought she might not answer. Then so softly he nearly missed it. Rebecca Lawson. Something in the way she said it, like testing an instrument long unused, made him glance back. Her expression remained guarded, but something had shifted. Samuel Garrison, he offered in return. Most folks call me Sam. They crested a rise as the sun began its descent, revealing a modest homestead nestled against the foothills. A sturdy cabin, small barn, corral, and the beginning of what might someday be a proper ranch house. Cattle dotted the grassland beyond. It's not much, Samuel said, suddenly conscious of his simple holdings, but it's peaceful. Rebecca said nothing as they approached, but he felt her taking in every detail, assessing escape routes. He realized with a pang of curiosity about what kind of life taught a young woman such caution. The cabin was sparse but clean, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a small cooking area, and a narrow bed in the corner. Samuel immediately recognized the awkwardness of the arrangement. "You can take the cabin," he said, leading her inside. "I'll bunk in the hayloft. Been doing it half the summer anyway when work runs late." Rebecca stood in the center of the room, looking lost despite the small space. "Why are you doing this?" Samuel busied himself lighting the stove. "Doing what?" "Risking yourself for a stranger, taking in someone clearly running from something." He considered her question seriously as he filled a kettle. "My father would call it foolishness. He believed the frontier demanded looking out for yourself first." He placed the kettle on the stove. "Maybe I'm testing if he was right." Rebecca set her satchel on the table, but kept her hand on it. "And if I'm dangerous?" Samuel almost smiled. "Are you?" "Not in the way you mean." She glanced toward the window. "But danger follows me all the same." "Wyoming's got plenty of space for outrunning trouble." Samuel moved toward the door. "Rest, there's food in the pantry. We can talk more tomorrow." He paused at the threshold, struck by the incongruity of this refined young woman standing in his crude cabin. "Whatever you're running from, Miss Lawson, you're safe here tonight." The flicker of hope that crossed her face stayed with him as he walked to the barn, wondering what impulse had led him to upend his solitary existence for a woman whose very name remained a mystery until hours ago. Morning came with the realization that Samuel had a guest with no clothes beyond what she wore. After tending to the livestock, he returned to the cabin to find Rebecca wearing his spare shirt over her dress, attempting to cook breakfast. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the shirt. "I needed to wash my things." "Not at all," he set a bundle on the table. "Brought some things from the storage chest, belonged to my mother. Might not fit perfect, but they're clean." Rebecca touched the simple calico dresses with surprising tenderness. "Your mother." "Died when I was 16, fever." Samuel moved to help with the cooking. "Father passed 7 years back. Snake bite while mending fence. Been on my own since." "I'm sorry." The words were simple but genuine. "Life out here comes with hard edges," he said, taking over the cooking when he saw her struggling with the temperamental stove. "What about you? Family looking for you?" Rebecca stiffened. No family." The way she said it told Samuel there was more to the story, but he didn't press. Instead, he nodded toward the window where his small herd grazed in the distance. "Need to check the north pasture today. You're welcome to ride along. Might do you good to see more than these 4 walls." To his surprise, she agreed. An hour later, wearing one of his mother's dresses that hung a bit loose on her frame, Rebecca sat atop his gentlest mare, riding alongside him across the rolling grassland. "You handle a horse well," he observed. "I grew up riding," she said, then looked away as if she'd revealed too much. They reached the creek that marked his northern boundary, dismounting to let the horses drink. Samuel checked his fencing while Rebecca wandered to the water's edge, kneeling to trail her fingers through the current. "It's beautiful here," she said quietly, "peaceful." "That's why I stay." Samuel joined her by the creek. "Cattle business isn't making me rich, but there's freedom in this life." "Freedom," she repeated, the word weighted with longing. "I've been chasing that for months now." "What are you running from, Rebecca?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. She looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps measuring whether he could be trusted with her truth. A man who believes he owns me. Samuel felt a cold anger at her words. A husband. No, though he tried to make me one. Her voice grew distant. My father died owing a debt to Harlan Dukes, a gambling debt. Dukes offered to forgive it if I would marry him. She shuddered. He's 30 years my senior and has buried 2 wives already. You refused. I agreed at first for my father's sake, but after the funeral I overheard Dukes telling his business partner how convenient my father's passing had been. Her eyes hardened. He arranged for my father to be robbed on his way home one night. The robbery turned deadly. Samuel's jaw tightened. So you ran. Rebecca nodded. With nothing but what I could carry, he's had men tracking me across 3 territories. They nearly caught me in Cheyenne. I've been using different names in every town. And Smith was the latest. Until you called me Rebecca yesterday. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. It was strange hearing my real name again. I'd almost forgotten how it sounded. Samuel processed her story, understanding now the haunted wariness in her eyes. These men in town, they work for Dukes. Yes, they must have recognized me. She looked toward the distant mountains. I should leave soon. They'll start searching the outlying farms. No, the force in Samuel's voice surprised them both. Running keeps you vulnerable. My ranch is remote enough. We can make preparations in case they come looking. I won't bring danger to your door, she protested. It's already here, he said simply. Question is whether you face it alone or with someone at your back. The look she gave him then, surprise melting into something like tentative hope, stirred feelings Samuel had long dismissed as impractical on the frontier. For the first time in years, he questioned his father's wisdom about self-reliance being the only way to survive. Over the next 2 weeks, Rebecca slowly integrated into the rhythm of ranch life. Samuel taught her the workings of his small homestead, surprised at how quickly she adapted to the chores. They established a cautious routine, taking meals together, working side by side during the day, and retreating to their separate sleeping quarters at night. Samuel found himself telling her about his dreams for the ranch, expanding the herd, building a proper house, perhaps even planting an orchard like his mother had always wanted. Rebecca listened with genuine interest, offering suggestions that revealed an educated background she otherwise rarely mentioned. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Rebecca broke their comfortable silence. I never thanked you properly, she said, for taking me in, for believing me. Samuel shrugged, nothing to thank me for. There is, her hand hesitantly touched his arm. You've shown me kindness when you had every reason to turn away. I haven't experienced much of that these past months. The simple contact of her hand on his arm sent an unexpected warmth through him. Seemed like the right thing to do. Rebecca smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. Your father would disapprove, wouldn't he, taking in a stranger, risking your safety? Probably, Samuel couldn't help returning her smile, but I'm starting to think he was wrong about some things. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities, until a distant sound broke the spell, hoofbeats approaching from the east. Rebecca's smile vanished, fear flooding back into her eyes. Inside, Samuel said quietly, reaching for the rifle he kept by the door. Use the cellar if needed, remember what we planned. She nodded, slipping into the cabin while Samuel remained on the porch, rifle resting casually across his lap as 3 riders appeared on the road leading to his property. His heart pounded, but his expression remained neutral as the men approached. The leader, a wiry man with a pockmarked face, reined in several yards from the porch. Evening, he called. Hope we're not intruding. Sun's nearly down, Samuel replied evenly. Most visitors come earlier in the day. The man smiled without warmth, just passing through, checking with locals, looking for a young woman, blonde, pretty, about 20. Might be using a false name. Stole some valuable items from our employer back east. Haven't seen many women out here, valuable items or otherwise, Samuel said. Ranch life doesn't attract many ladies. The second rider, broader and wearing a dust-covered bowler hat, leaned forward. Mind if we water our horses? Been a long ride from town. Samuel recognized the request for what it was, an excuse to look around his property. "Troughs by the barn," he said, not moving from his position. "Help yourselves." The men dismounted, leading their horses toward the barn but clearly surveying the homestead as they went. Samuel remained on the porch, rifle still across his lap, watching as they took longer than necessary to water their mounts. "Nice place," the leader said, returning to stand at the foot of the porch steps. "You run it alone." "Just me," Samuel confirmed. "Occasional help during calving season." The man nodded slowly, saw a clothesline round back. Some items looked small for a man your size. Samuel kept his expression neutral. "Laundry day, washing what I've got left from my mother. Sentimental, I suppose." The third man, who had remained silent, suddenly pointed toward the corral. "2 saddles in your tack room, fresh tracks from a second horse heading north." The tension thickened as the leader's hand drifted toward his holster. "Want to amend your statement about being alone, mister?" Samuel's finger moved closer to his rifle's trigger. "Horse belongs to my neighbor to the west, boarded it while he's visiting family in Laramie. He rode over to collect it this morning." "That's so," the leader's skepticism was plain. "Mind if we look inside, just to be thorough?" "I mind considerably," Samuel said, standing slowly. "Sun's down now. Whatever business you have can wait for daylight." The standoff lingered, tension crackling between them. Finally, the leader backed down with a tight smile. "Of course, sorry to trouble you so late," he mounted his horse. "If you do happen to see a young lady matching that description, there's a substantial reward. Mr. Dukes is most anxious to recover his property." "I'll keep that in mind," Samuel said, watching as they rode away, their postures conveying clear suspicion. Only after their figures disappeared into the darkness did Samuel return inside, finding Rebecca emerging from the root cellar beneath the cabin floor. "They'll be back," she said, her face pale in the lamplight. Samuel nodded grimly. "Not tonight, but soon, probably with more men." He began gathering supplies. "We need to prepare." "I should leave," Rebecca insisted. "They'll hurt you to get to me." "They'll have to try mighty hard." Samuel checked his ammunition. "I've notified neighbors I trust about potential trouble. We're not without allies." Rebecca stared at him, bewildered. "Why would you risk this? Your home, your safety, all for someone you barely know." Samuel paused in his preparations. "Is that what you think, that I barely know you? We met barely 2 weeks ago. And in those 2 weeks, I've learned you're brave enough to flee from danger, but compassionate enough to help mend a sick calf through the night. You're educated, but not above manual labor. You laugh at sunrise, but grow melancholy at sunset." He stepped closer. "I may not know every detail of your past, Rebecca, but I know who you are now." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I've brought nothing but danger to your door." "You've brought more than that." The admission surprised even him. "For 7 years, this ranch has been just a place I work. Since you arrived, it's starting to feel like a home again." The confession hung between them, more revealing than he'd intended. Rebecca's expression softened, vulnerability replacing fear as she moved toward him. "Samuel," she whispered, her hand reaching for his. Their fingers had barely touched when a gunshot shattered the window, sending them both diving for cover as glass rained across the floor. "They didn't leave," Rebecca gasped. Samuel crawled to the rifle he'd set aside. "They circled back, probably waited to see if anyone else emerged once they'd gone." He reached for her hand. "We need to get to the barn. There's a hidden space beneath the hay storage." Another shot splintered the doorframe. Samuel returned fire through the window, forcing their attackers to seek cover. "On my signal, run for the north side of the barn," he instructed, reloading quickly. "I'll cover you, then follow." Rebecca nodded, gathering her skirts. Samuel fired 3 rapid shots, then shouted, "Now." They burst from the cabin, Rebecca sprinting toward the barn while Samuel provided covering fire. The darkness helped conceal them as they reached the barn's shadow, slipping inside through the side door. Samuel barred the door behind them, then led Rebecca to a trapdoor concealed beneath straw bales. "Down here," he whispered. "There's a tunnel that leads to the creek bed. My father built it during the early settler conflicts." "What about you?" Rebecca clutched his arm. "I'll create a diversion, then follow." Seeing her protest forming, he squeezed her hand. "I promise I'll be right behind you. But someone needs to slow them down." Reluctantly, Rebecca descended into the narrow passage. Before closing the trapdoor, Samuel impulsively leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, a brief, fervent kiss that conveyed everything he couldn't put into words. "For luck," he said hoarsely, then closed the trapdoor and concealed it once more. Samuel positioned himself near the hayloft window, rifle ready as shadows moved toward the barn. He counted 3 men, the same 3 from earlier, spreading out to surround the structure. Taking careful aim, he fired, striking the ground near the leader's feet. "That's close enough," he called out. "Next one won't miss." "Hand over the girl and we'll leave you be," the leader shouted back. "This isn't your fight." "Seems like you made it mine when you started shooting at my home." Samuel moved to another position, creating the impression of multiple defenders. The standoff continued for several minutes, with sporadic gunfire exchanged. Samuel knew he needed to buy time for Rebecca to navigate the tunnel, which emerged nearly a quarter-mile away. He methodically worked his way toward the rear of the barn where a second, smaller door led out. Just as he prepared to make his own escape, the sharp smell of smoke reached him. Looking out, he saw flames licking up the barn's exterior where one of the men had thrown a burning torch. Samuel cursed, knowing the dry timber would catch quickly. He fired once more toward the attackers, then slipped out the back, staying low as he made for the creek bed where the tunnel emerged. The sound of the barn beginning to blaze covered his retreat as he raced through the darkness. He found Rebecca waiting anxiously at the tunnel exit, her face lighting with relief when she saw him. "They've set fire to the barn," he explained, taking her hand. "We need to move quickly. I have a cache of supplies and horses hidden in the hills for emergencies." Together they made their way through the darkness, following a game trail that wound up into the rocky foothills east of the ranch. The glow of the burning barn illuminated the night sky behind them, a stark reminder of how quickly security could be reduced to ash. By dawn, they'd reached Samuel's emergency shelter, a small, natural cave reinforced with timber supports, stocked with basic provisions and hidden by brush. 2 horses were corralled in a concealed paddock nearby, grazing contentedly on the sparse mountain grass. "You prepared for this," Rebecca said, sinking onto a rough-hewn bench inside the cave. Samuel lit a small, smokeless fire. "I prepare for all contingencies. The frontier doesn't forgive the unprepared." "Your father's wisdom." "Yes," Samuel smiled faintly, "though he'd still call me a fool for using these preparations to help someone else rather than just saving myself." Rebecca watched him as he prepared a simple breakfast from his stores. "I think he'd be proud," she said softly. "There's more strength in helping others than in isolation." The day passed with Samuel scouting the area, confirming that Dukes's men were searching the surrounding countryside but hadn't discovered their hiding place. They spent the night in the cave, taking turns keeping watch, though the exhaustion of their flight eventually led Rebecca to fall asleep against Samuel's shoulder during her watch. He didn't wake her, instead watching the play of firelight across her face, marveling at how this woman he'd known for such a short time had upended everything he believed about survival on the frontier. The following morning, Samuel made a decision. "We can't keep running," he said as they shared the last of their coffee. "Dukes will keep sending men until he finds you." "What choice do we have?" Rebecca asked. "We fight back," Samuel said firmly, "not with guns but with the law. Dukes arranged your father's murder. That's a hanging offense in any territory. It's my word against his. He's wealthy, connected." "Perhaps, but men like him make enemies. We need evidence and allies." Samuel outlined his plan to travel to Cheyenne, where the territorial marshal had a reputation for incorruptibility, and formally file charges against Dukes for the murder of Rebecca's father. "It's risky," Rebecca admitted, "but continuing to run is just delaying the inevitable." They set out at midday, taking a circuitous route toward Cheyenne, avoiding main trails and settlements. As they rode, Samuel found himself sharing more about his life, his childhood dreams, his struggles after his parents died, his determination to make the ranch succeed despite the odds. Rebecca, too, began opening up about her past, her education at a Boston ladies' seminary, her father's decline after her mother's death, and the better days before gambling consumed him. In the vast spaces between wilderness camps, their shared stories bridged the gap of their short acquaintance. On the 3rd night of their journey, camped in a sheltered ravine, Rebecca finally asked the question that had lingered between them since their hasty departure. That moment in the barn before we separated, she looked into the small campfire rather than at him. Was that just for luck, as you said? Samuel set aside the coffee cup he'd been holding. No, he admitted. It wasn't just for luck. Then what was it for? She finally met his eyes across the flames. It was because I suddenly realized I might never get another chance to do it. The honesty felt both frightening and freeing. And I couldn't bear that thought. Rebecca's expression softened. I've been running so long, I stopped believing I could ever stop, that I could ever have anything resembling a normal life again. And now I find myself hoping. She moved to sit beside him. Even with everything burning down around us, I'm hoping. When her hand found his, Samuel intertwined their fingers, the simple contact speaking volumes in the quiet night. This time, when he leaned toward her, there was no urgent danger driving the moment, only the pull between two people who had found something unexpected in each other. Their kiss deepened, sweet with promise and possibility, until Rebecca gently pulled away, resting her forehead against his. I don't want to hope for something that can't be, she whispered. What do you mean? If we succeed, if by some miracle Dukes is brought to justice, what happens then? You've lost your home because of me, your ranch. Samuel cupped her face in his hands. Buildings can be rebuilt, land endures. What matters is who shares it with you. The brightness in her eyes told him she understood his meaning. They spent the night beside the fire, talking of possibilities and dreams that had seemed impossible just weeks before. 3 days later, they reached Cheyenne, cautiously approaching the marshal's office. To their surprise, they found not just the marshal but a federal judge in attendance, passing through on circuit. The next hours passed in a flurry of formal statements and sworn testimonies. Rebecca's account of overhearing Dukes confess to arranging her father's murder caught the judge's interest, particularly when Samuel added that the same men had attacked his property without provocation. Dukes has been skirting the law for years, the marshal confirmed. Complaints have been filed before, but witnesses tend to disappear or recant if Miss Lawson is willing to testify formally. I am, Rebecca said firmly. The judge considered them thoughtfully. It would be safer if you were not alone, Miss Lawson. Unmarried women making accusations against powerful men often find their reputations questioned along with their testimony. Samuel straightened. We had already discussed marriage, Your Honor, he said, with a quick glance at Rebecca. Once this matter is resolved. The judge nodded approvingly. I perform civil ceremonies when required. Given the circumstances, perhaps haste would be prudent in this case. That evening, in the small chapel adjacent to the courthouse, Samuel and Rebecca exchanged simple vows before the judge and marshal as witnesses. The circumstances were far from what either might have imagined for such an occasion, but as Samuel slipped his mother's ring onto Rebecca's finger, retrieved from his emergency supplies, the makeshift ceremony felt more meaningful than any elaborate affair. I meant what I said, Samuel told her later in the privacy of the room the marshal had arranged for them. It wasn't just for show or for the judge's benefit. Rebecca touched the simple gold band on her finger. I know, she met his gaze steadily. When you first called me by my real name in town, something changed. For months, I'd been nobody, just different aliases running from place to place. Hearing my name and your voice made me feel real again. You've been real to me since the moment you stood in my cabin, Samuel said, drawing her close. Making the ranch into a home I never knew I wanted. 2 weeks later, Harlan Dukes was arrested when he arrived in Cheyenne, expecting to claim his runaway bride. The evidence against him had mounted surprisingly quickly once the investigation began, former associates willing to testify against him, financial records showing suspicious transfers around the time of Mr. Lawson's death, and most damning, one of his own men turning witness after being captured. The trial date was set for spring, with Rebecca and Samuel both scheduled to testify. Until then, they were free to return to their lives, changed as they were. They approached Samuel's ranch cautiously, unsure what remained after the fire. The cabin stood untouched, though the barn was a charred skeleton of its former structure. Neighbors had rounded up the scattered cattle, tending them until the owners returned. It could have been much worse, Samuel observed as they dismounted. Rebecca surveyed the damage, then looked toward the mountains where they'd hidden. We can rebuild, she said, squeezing his hand. Together. By winter, a new barn stood on the foundation of the old, larger and sturdier than before. The cabin had been expanded with a proper bedroom added. Neighbors had helped with the raising, creating in weeks what would have taken Samuel months alone. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell gently outside their window, Rebecca sat by the fire working on plans for the spring garden while Samuel finished carving a cradle, their most hopeful project for the coming year. "Do you think your father was wrong?" Rebecca asked, looking up from her sketches. "About the frontier demanding isolation?" Samuel ran his hand along the smooth wood of the cradle. "I think he confused independence with isolation. The frontier doesn't punish connection, it requires it. No one survives out here truly alone." Rebecca set aside her work and joined him, examining the cradle with approval. "When I arrived in Pine Ridge, I was nobody, not even a name I could claim as my own. Now I'm Rebecca Garrison with a home, a future." Her hand rested briefly on her still flat stomach. "A family." Samuel drew her into his arms, remembering the dust-covered woman who had stepped from the stagecoach months ago. "You were always Rebecca," he said softly. "You just needed someone to recognize you." Outside, the snow continued falling, blanketing the ranch in pristine white, covering the scars of the past and creating a clean slate for their future. The Wyoming wilderness stretched vast around their small homestead, no longer a barrier to be conquered alone but a shared frontier, wild and beautiful and theirs together.